We have this private sector universe. We've got the decentralized, non-sovereign digital currencies. We've got private sector issued stable coins. We're going to big arrangements that kind of make those work and scale. But we also have proactive discussion on the government issuing its own digital currency, a la what China is doing. And this is something, lots of governments are contemplating and, potentially, theoretically inserting themselves into the identity and transaction history relationship at the token holder level. And, it is in the dialogues around this, it's certainly, these privacy questions are really coming into play. And on the one hand, people are saying this could get very dystopian, and we need to maintain some of the boundaries that we have. But I know that's something that you guys at Coin Center have been plugged into and thinking about a bit.
Yeah, so it's funny because something like a central bank digital currency is kind of outside of our remit. But obviously, being digital currency experts, we have ideas about it. So I'll just tell you what my personal ideas about it are. And it's this, is that there's basically been discussion about two possibilities for a digital dollar or central bank digital currency. One would be account-based, where basically the Fed opens up accounts for individuals. The other is token-based, right? In my mind, there's all the value that you would want is in a token-based system. An account-based digital dollar system is basically a public option for banking, which maybe that's great if you're looking to expand access. But the real opportunity in creating a digital currency for the dollar is making it bearer, making it programmable, right? Making it universal. And so if I'm in Rwanda and I want to engage on a regular contract and payments with somebody in Pakistan, right? And I want to use the dollar because the dollar is the best money there is, I really can't open a Fed account.
Right.
So that excludes me. So It's got to be token-based. And if it's token-based, to really, again, meet its potential, it's got to be private. Mm-hmm. Right? If it's not private, again, it doesn't work.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is something that I'm sure you both have reflections on. But the internet has given us peer-to-peer communications. It's given us peer-to-peer data exchange. It's given us permissionless decentralized infrastructure for all of these things. And, if you would have gone back 30 years ago and said, anyone in the world can kind of, broadcast privately, securely to anyone else, for free without any eavesdropping or whatever, it would be like, what are you, out of your mind? There's so many things that the open internet has allowed for, which, fundamentally just kind of mowed over existing institutional understandings, even policy and regulatory frameworks that existed. One could argue about some of those maybe have gone too far, but nonetheless, the internet has allowed this, and token-based, stable coins, or whether they're somehow there's a backing that is official, i.e., it's the reserves are in a central bank or whatever that model is. The internet gives us this ability to transact with anyone, anywhere, directly over a public network in this bearer instrument way, and that's and programmable and all these things that you talked about. That's like a really big breakthrough for the world, and it strikes me that we really ought to defend that and defend the possibilities that come from that, and what that means for people and what that means for businesses.
And
I certainly, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Paul.
I was going to say, I certainly think from a public policy perspective, we need to find a way to balance the regulatory compliance with the privacy component, because the dollar is the world's de facto currency, but it will not stay that way if there's no way easily for people outside the United States to make use of that, right? And it has become, we have been raising the barriers to entry. One of my early jobs, I worked in West Africa, right? The dollar was a de facto currency. People paid their bills in dollars, business to business transactions were done in dollars, but they were done in cash, right? And I can actually remember, holding what to me seemed like terrifying amounts of cash, but it was really useful because the dollar was such a reliable and stable currency. I think, a completely private token-based dollar would be a boon to money launderers and drug dealers and terrorists, and that's not something I want to see. But I also don't want to see it become impossible for individual users to have some personal privacy and for there to be relatively low barriers to entry. One of the things that is being looked at in China and people have talked about is a kind of a blended model where up to a certain amount of digital currency, you can have it and it operates like cash. It is effectively anonymous. There's no kind of barriers to entry and things like that. I think we have to think about something like that. I think, back in the good old days when we traveled internationally, you remember those just a few months ago, right? I think if you left the country, you moved around with more than a certain amount of money, you had to declare it, but nobody bothered you if you had a bit of cash in your wallet, right? And I think we need to figure out how to do that. But if we don't, to me, there's big economic policy implications for the loss of the dollar as the global reserve currency. And then secondly, I think the question that we often turn over in our minds is, central bank digital currencies, they sound nice, but what's obscured from this conversation all the time is the fact that almost all central bank transactions are already digital. And I have not heard, in many cases, a really compelling explanation for why central banks want to build a private blockchain that's not customer accessible, that doesn't support public blockchain transactions. That sounds to me like just another digital interbank payment systems. And I'm not clear always on the value proposition of why it should be a blockchain, a DLT, or some kind of other token-based system. And that's not been clearly articulated yet. And I think that's one of the reasons why you have seen a fair amount of experimentation, but not a specific push in a particular country outside of China.
Yeah. Digital currency enthusiasts and Bitcoiners for a long time have pointed out HTTP error 402, I think, which is the no payment, and saying, look, we were ready for web native digital payments, but they never happened. And Bitcoin or something like it was going to be it, and that hasn't happened in large part because of Bitcoin's volatility. So stable coins now have the promise of being say a dollar stable coin, being that programmable money that can be the native money of the web. But the problem there is you've got lots of different standards, lots of different kinds. That's what I think, if I was making policy for the US on central bank digital currency, boy, could you imagine what a official dollar coin would be? Now, I think if you game it all out, and I've done a lot of thinking about this, if you game it all out, I think Paul is right that the settlement that makes the most sense at the end of the day is going to be having cash-like properties up to a certain amount, but above that, have it be traced in some way. The problem is, I don't see how that's technically possible with a token-based model.
So I do. We think about this all the time, obviously, at Circle with USDC, and I think in fact the work that FATF has put forward and this work around travel, it basically defines a way to do this. I mean, it basically says, look, these are token based, they're bearer instruments, they can exist on a public blockchain. But if you're a VASP or you're an intermediary that's dealing in these, which is now becoming pretty uniform around the world, that if you're dealing in these things as a business, you have to do this with these rules. You need to keep records for things above $1,000, mm-hmm. And that's sort of the compromise position. They're all the same underlying digital cash instruments. They're all still the same. It's just if it's above $1,000, you're going to have to exchange a little bit more data, et cetera. And they ultimately still allow for individuals to self-custody as well. But it's the same kind of thing. Like I could self-custody $1 million in $100 bills. Like I have the ability to do that. But if I show up at a bank with that, they're going to want a lot of information from me in order to convert that into something that they're holding or investing on my behalf. And so, these sort of cash-like rules and these record-keeping rules, I think they can work and they can apply and still give that access in West Africa, or that programmability, or that base layer of privacy that people are interested in.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you that it's doable today, but when a CBDC is being designed from scratch, and so what are its what abilities will it provide for individuals are being designed from scratch? Will a designer, will a state designer make it such so that it mimics cash completely? And
Yeah.
I fear not. They're going to listen to the Ken Rogoffs of the world and say, no, there's no real legitimate reason why anybody has to have $1 million.
Yeah, this is a bigger question.
So, but I think this is where the power of public blockchains comes in, and this gets debated over and over again, and I really encourage people. There was an article, I want to say 15 years ago in Wired magazine. It was called "The Netheads versus the Bellheads," and it was about the early origins of the internet and the transition to IP. And I'll tell you, all the really smart people said that there was no scope for this chaotic, unstructured internet protocol. It's never going to scale. People aren't going to use it. It doesn't have quality of service. Right. I think the market tends to speak very effectively in that respect. I think if you design a system that doesn't provide for a lot of flexibility, that doesn't support open access, that isn't built on a genuinely open source model, you won't get a lot of adoption. Certainly you'll find some people who will adopt it. And we could have a whole separate episode on what I think is actually some very far-sighted and thoughtful regulation thoughts that are coming out of mainland China with regard to their market. But I think, particularly in the US and Europe, if it's not open source, if it's not public domain, if it doesn't run on public blockchains, people can design whatever they want. I'm not sure it's going to get adopted, right? There's hundreds and hundreds of private blockchains, right. And they have like zero traction. They're just like, they're empty shopping malls.
I'm totally with you on that. And I think, kind of private sector is racing ahead. The open standards, open source world is racing ahead. And ultimately, I think that's what's going to get the adoption and traction. And central banks will have supervisory standards, right? They'll versus like, we're going to go clean room